My husband put my name on a massive debt and fled the country. He had no idea who my father really was. My name is Patricia Volkov and I am 46 years old. I was sipping my afternoon tea when the front door burst open. Four men in dark suits walked into my living room like they owned the place. They did not look like police officers. They looked like predators. One of them stepped forward and dropped a heavy stack of papers on my lace tablecloth. He told me they were private debt collectors. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the top page. It was a loan for $25 million for a failed shipping venture. My signature was right there at the bottom in bold ink. I felt dizzy. I ran upstairs to the master bedroom to find my husband, Julian. His closet was completely empty. There were no suits, no shoes, and no suitcases. His gold wedding ring was sitting alone on the vanity. Next to it was a small, cruel note that said, "Sorry, Patricia. You always were the better tax shield." I tried to call Julian's phone, but the line was already disconnected. I checked his social media, and every photo of us had been scrubbed away. It was like I never existed in his life. I logged into our shared bank accounts with shaking hands, and my breath hitched. The balance was zero. He hadn't just left me, he had spent the last 2 years planning this. He used my name and my clean record to hide his dirty money and take out loans he never intended to pay back. He set me up to take the fall for everything while he disappeared into thin air. I looked around my quiet home and realized it was all a lie. If the story of my betrayal touches your heart, please subscribe to help a woman find her voice again. The lead collector leaned in close, smelling of cheap coffee. You have 78 hours to pay, or we take your house, your car, and your freedom. The collectors looked at me with pity. They saw an old, helpless housewife in a floral apron. They thought I was a soft target who would break under the pressure. They had no idea that Patricia Vance was just a name I used to hide from my past. They didn't know that my real maiden name was Patricia Volkov. I had spent decades trying to forget that name and the shadow it cast. I wanted a simple life away from the dark world of my youth. But now, that simple life was burning down around me. I stood there silently, letting them think I was terrified. Inside, a cold fire was starting to burn. I haven't spoken to my father in 10 years because of the terrible things he has done. But at this moment, he was the only man on earth who could make $25 million look like pocket change. I sat on the edge of my bed and remembered why I married Julian in the first place. After growing up around danger, Julian seemed so boring. He was safe. He worked a desk job and liked to talk about gardening. He was the exact opposite of my father, a billionaire logistics mogul who ruled his empire with an iron fist. I thought I was choosing a man who would never hurt me. I thought I was escaping the violence and the secrets of the Volkov family. I wanted peace more than anything else. But as I stared at Julian's empty closet, the truth hit me like a physical blow. Julian didn't marry me because he loved my quiet nature. He didn't marry me for my heart. He targeted me because he thought I was a woman with no visible family left to protect her from a man like him. I went to the basement and pulled out an old floorboard. Underneath was a hidden laptop I hadn't touched in a decade. I powered it up, and my fingers remembered the old codes. I started tracking Julian's passport and his digital footprints. He wasn't as clever as he thought. I found him within an hour. He didn't just flee the country. He was hiding in the Cayman Islands. He was staying at a luxury resort that I recognized immediately. It was owned by one of my father's oldest rivals. Julian was flaunting his stolen wealth in a place he thought I could never reach. He was probably laughing at me right now. But my blood ran cold when I saw the guest registry on the resort's private server. He wasn't alone in paradise. He was there with my best friend, Chloe, who had sat at my dinner table just last week. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as I looked at the screen. I found Chloe's private social media account and saw a photo she had posted only an hour ago. It was a clandestine shot of Julian's back as he stood on a balcony overlooking the blue ocean. I didn't need to see his face to know it was him. I recognized the expensive silk robe he was wearing immediately. I had saved my own money to buy it for him for our last wedding anniversary. I remembered how he kissed my cheek and told me I was the only woman he would ever love. It was all a performance. The caption under the photo made my stomach turn. It read, "Finally free from the dead weight. Champagne and sun with my king." I realized then that they had been laughing at my boring life for years while I was busy being a loyal wife and friend. I picked up my old burner phone and dialed a number I had kept memorized since I was 5 years old. My heart was thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. The line clicked, and a deep, gravelly voice answered on the very first ring. "Patricia? I've been waiting 10 years for this call. he said. It was my father. He sounded older, but his voice still had that edge of power that used to terrify me. I didn't have to explain the situation or cry about my broken heart. In my family, we don't talk about feelings, we talk about problems and solutions. If you want to see how a daughter of a king takes back her crown, hit subscribe right now. My father didn't ask what was wrong or how much I needed. He simply took a breath and said, "The jet is already in the air. Stay exactly where you are." The transformation began that night. I walked into my guest room and opened a trunk I had kept locked for a long time. I traded my soft suburban sweaters and sensible shoes for a tailored black suit that fit like a second skin. I put on a pair of high heels that felt more like weapons than footwear. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim anymore. I saw a Volkov. An hour later, I met my father's cleaner, a tall, silent man named Silas. He had worked for my father since I was a child. Silas didn't say hello or offer a hug. He simply handed me a thick leather file. As I flipped through the pages, I realized Julian was a bigger fool than I thought. He wasn't just a common thief, he had been selling my father's old secret trade routes to the highest bidder behind everyone's back. The next morning, the private debt collectors returned to my house. They pounded on the front door, ready to seize my furniture and kick me out onto the street. They found the front door unlocked and walked in, expecting to find me crying in the kitchen. Instead, they found me sitting in the dark of the dining room, calmly sipping a $10,000 bottle of scotch that Silas had brought. I didn't look up when they entered. The lead collector started to yell about his money, but he stopped mid-sentence. He noticed the 6 large men standing in the shadows behind my chair. These men made the debt collectors look like schoolboys playing at being tough. I set my glass down and looked the collector in the eye. "The debt is handled," I said in a cold voice. "Now, let us talk about the interest you charged me." While I was dealing with the thugs in my living room, Julian was living the dream in the Cayman Islands. He was sitting at a white-clothed table on the beach, sipping expensive wine and feeling like the smartest man in the entire world. He probably thought I was currently sitting in a jail cell or crying on a curb. He raised his glass to Chloe and made a toast to Patricia's prison sentence and their new life of luxury. He thought he had outrun the law in his past. But his smile vanished when the waiter approached the table with a silver tray. There was no food on the tray. Instead, there was a single, heavy silver coin with my father's family crest stamped into the metal. Julian's hand began to shake so hard that his wine spilled onto his expensive white linen shirt. Julian recognized the coin immediately. He had seen it once in an old book I kept, though I had told him it was just a family trinket. Now, the weight of its meaning crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He knew the stories of the Volkov family, the ones people whispered about in dark corners of the shipping industry. He knew that the silver coin meant a debt had been called in, and the price was usually blood. He turned to Chloe, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He was shaking so violently that he nearly knocked over the table. "We have to leave. Now," he hissed, grabbing his bag. He didn't explain why. He just started running toward the resort lobby, leaving his expensive meal behind. But as they reached the grand marble entrance, they found their path blocked. Every single exit at the luxury resort was suddenly under maintenance. I didn't just want Julian's money back, I wanted to erase his entire existence from the digital world. While he was panicking at the resort, I sat with Silas and his team of hackers. We didn't just empty his offshore accounts. I watched with a cold smile as we transferred every single cent of his stolen fortune to an orphanage in his tiny hometown. I wanted him to be the one who funded their new playground while he starved. I changed his passwords and deleted his fake identities one by one. By the time I was finished, Julian Vance was a ghost with a balance of 0. He ran to the resort docks and tried to pay a local boat captain for a secret escape to the mainland. He swiped his untraceable black card with a desperate look in his eyes. The machine buzzed red. The transaction was declined for a reason he never expected: account deceased. Chloe was huddled in the hotel room, crying and trying to call her parents back in the States for help. She thought her family's mid-level connections could save her from this nightmare. I signaled Silas, and we rerouted the call directly to my laptop. When she heard my voice instead of her mother's, she let out a small, pathetic shriek. "Hi, Chloe. I hope the champagne was crisp and the sun was warm," I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. "My father is very eager to meet the woman who helped steal from his only daughter. He has a lot of questions about your loyalty." I could hear her phone hit the floor as her hands failed her. She looked out the window and saw a black SUV with tinted windows pull up to the curb. She realized then that the dead weight she had joked about was actually an anchor. I decided that calling the police was far too easy for a man like Julian. The law has too many rules, and Julian was a man who loved to find loopholes. I wanted him to experience the chaos he had forced upon me. I took his GPS coordinates and put his location up for sale on the dark web. I didn't sell it to just anyone. I sent the link to the various creditors and shady business partners he had stolen from long before he even met me. These were people who didn't care about courtrooms or lawyers. Within minutes, the bidding war began. 5 different international cartels were bidding on his head like he was a piece of vintage furniture. If you want to see how a woman turns the hunter into the hunted, subscribe for more. I watched the numbers climb, knowing that Julian's world was shrinking with every passing second. I took my father's private jet and flew to the Cayman Islands that evening. The humidity felt like a heavy blanket, but I didn't mind. I walked into Julian's hotel room in the middle of the night using a master key Silas had provided. The room was dark, smelling of Chloe's expensive perfume and Julian's fear. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed and watched him sleep for a moment. He looked so small and pathetic when he wasn't lying to someone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out his clean passport, the one he thought would take him to a new life in Europe. When he finally opened his eyes and saw me sitting there in my black suit, he let out a choked gasp. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled out a lighter and set his passport on fire right in front of him. The flames licked the edges of the passport, turning his golden ticket into black ash. Julian scrambled backward, his back hitting the headboard with a dull thud. Even now, trapped and exposed, he tried to use the only tool he had left, his lies. Patricia. I did it for us. I was going to come back for you once the heat died down, he cried. His voice was thin and shaky. He actually tried to reach out and touch my cheek with the same hand that had signed the documents to ruin my life. I didn't feel sadness, and I didn't feel love. I felt the cold, hard weight of my father's legacy in my veins. Before his fingers could graze my skin, I grabbed his hand and broke his index finger with one quick, brutal twist. He screamed, clutching his hand to his chest. I looked down at him and whispered, "Don't touch the merchandise, Julian." I waved my hand, and Silas pushed Chloe into the room. She was a complete mess, her makeup smeared across her face and her expensive dress wrinkled. As soon as she saw me, she collapsed to her knees, sobbing and begging for mercy. She started confessing everything before I even asked a single question. She claimed that Julian had manipulated her. She told me that Julian had lied to her for months, saying that I was terminally ill and that he needed to embezzle the $25 million just to pay for my experimental treatments overseas. Julian had turned my life into a tragic story just to get his mistress to help him steal. He didn't just take my money and my credit, he stole my dignity by making me a pity case for his own gain. I felt a fresh wave of anger wash over me. The heavy wooden door to the suite swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees instantly. My father walked in, dressed in a gray wool coat despite the tropical heat. He didn't look like a man in his 80s, he looked like a monument made of granite. When Julian saw his face, the little bit of color left in his skin vanished completely. He finally realized the truth. He hadn't married a lonely woman with a small inheritance, he had married the daughter of the most dangerous man in the shipping world. My father stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Julian like he was a bug under a boot. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to me and asked, "Patricia, my darling, do you want it to be quick, or do you want it to be right?" I looked at my father and gave him a small, tight nod. "I want it to be right, Father," I said. I told him to wait downstairs with his men. I wasn't ready to end this yet. I wanted Julian to feel the crushing weight of a debt that can never be paid. I wanted him to understand that some things are more expensive than money. Julian was blubbering now, promising to be my slave, promising to give back every cent, and promising to love me forever. It was disgusting to listen to. I stood up and smoothed out my jacket, looking at him with total disgust. I reached into Silas's bag and pulled out a heavy metal shovel, tossing it onto the expensive silk sheets next to him. "Get up, Julian," I commanded. "We are going for a long drive into the middle of the island. It's time to work." We drove for an hour into the deep, dark heart of the island where the tourists never go. The air was thick with the sound of insects and the smell of damp earth. Under the glare of the SUV's headlights, I forced Julian to start digging. He was crying and begging, his broken finger making every shovelful of dirt in agony. He truly believed he was digging his own grave. He kept pausing to look at me, hoping to see a flicker of the soft Patricia he used to know. He found nothing but stone. After 2 hours of sweating and sobbing, his shovel hit something hard and wooden. He gasped, thinking he had found a body. He reached down and uncovered a small chest. Inside was every single gift he had ever bought me over the years, now covered in filth and rot. He realized then that I had buried our past long ago. Julian stared at the chest of rotted jewelry and muddy watches, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked up at me, confused and terrified. I knelt down so I was at eye level with him, the dirt staining my expensive suit. I told him that his secret shipping venture was never actually a secret. My father had known about it from the very first day. The land Julian had used for his warehouses and the docks he had rented were all owned by a shell company belonging to my father. Julian hadn't outsmarted anyone. He had been playing in a sandbox that my family built. "You didn't steal from me, Julian," I whispered, and I watched his eyes go wide with a new kind of horror. "You were unknowingly leasing from the Volkov family. And in our world, the rent is always due in full." Julian's mind started racing, trying to find a way to bargain for his life. He thought he could trade secrets he had gathered while working in my father's shadow. He started babbling about a powerful senator he had bribed to protect his illegal shipping routes. He thought this information made him valuable, like a shield he could hide behind. I pulled my phone from my pocket and showed him a photo from my last birthday dinner. It was a picture of me laughing while a distinguished man toasted to my health. Julian's jaw dropped. "You mean my Uncle Victor?" I asked him. The senator was my father's younger brother. Every bribe Julian had paid had gone right back into the family coffers. He had been paying for protection from the very people he was trying to rob. He was a mouse trying to bribe a cat. I didn't want to leave any loose ends. I knew that the local authorities on the island were very strict about their laws, especially when it came to the honor of their government. I had Silas leak Julian's location to the police, but I added a special twist to the evidence we left behind. We planted forged documents in his luggage that made it look like he was planning to overthrow the local leadership. I framed him for a crime he didn't commit, but it was a crime that this island nation took more seriously than murder. He was arrested on the beach while trying to flee in a stolen boat. The charges were insulting the crown and sedition. If you love seeing a villain fall into his own trap, hit subscribe now. As the handcuffs clicked, Julian looked at me one last time. Realizing his games were over, Julian was thrown into a humid, overcrowded prison cell that smelled of salt and despair. He spent his first few nights staring at the ceiling, waiting for me to show up. He actually believed that my old self would eventually feel guilty. He expected me to come with a team of lawyers and show him mercy because of our years together. He thought he could still charm me. Instead, the only thing he received was a single postcard. On the front was a photo of me and my father at a grand gala in London, surrounded by royalty and wealth. On the back, I had written only 3 words: "Who is Julian?" I wanted him to know that to the world, and to me, he no longer existed. He was a nothing man sitting in a dark cell, forgotten by everyone he tried to impress. Now, the real justice began. I didn't just want him in jail, I wanted to own him. I used my father's resources to legally buy Julian's $25 million debt from the private collectors. I bought every contract and every signature he had ever made. I was no longer his victim or his ex-wife. I was now his only lender. I owned his past, his present, and his future. I sent a new terms agreement to his prison cell, carried by a lawyer who worked for the Volkov family. When Julian saw my name at the top of the legal papers as the chairman of the debt-holding company, he collapsed to the floor. The grand reckoning was finally here, and I was going to make sure he felt the weight of every cent he had ever stolen from my heart. The new terms I sent to Julian's cell were not about money. They were about endurance. In that island prison, there is a grueling detail where inmates must crush heavy coral rock under the blistering sun for 10 hours a day. I made sure Julian was assigned to that unit indefinitely. Every tiny penny he earned for that backbreaking labor was legally diverted back into my personal bank account to pay off the interest on his debt. He was working in the heat until his hands bled just to pay me back for the life he tried to steal. I sat in my air-conditioned office back home, watching the tiny deposits hit my ledger every week. At his current rate of pay, I calculated that he would be debt-free in exactly 450 years. He was no longer a mun. He was a source of passive income for the woman he called dead weight. I didn't send Chloe to jail with him. That would have been too simple, and she would have just found a new man to manipulate behind bars. Instead, I gave her a job. I made her my personal assistant under a very strict, ironclad legal contract. She had to watch me live the beautiful, powerful life she had tried to snatch away from me every single day. She had to fetch my coffee, iron my clothes, and schedule my appointments. She lived in a small, windowless room in the servants' quarters of my estate. I wanted her to see what real loyalty looked like from the outside. Her first major task was a bitter pill for her to swallow. I forced her to spend 3 weeks planning my massive freedom party. She had to order the finest champagne and flowers for a celebration of my life without her, and Julian, the rival businessman who had hosted Julian at the resort, thought he was safe because he was a wealthy man with his own private security. He was wrong. My father does not forgive those who give shelter to the enemies of the Volkov family. Within a week, his entire empire was hit with a massive regulatory audit by my father's high-level associates in the government. His ships were seized, his bank accounts were frozen, and his reputation was dragged through the dirt. By Friday, his billion-dollar company was crumbling into pieces. He sat in his empty office, wondering why the world had suddenly turned against him. He eventually realized it was because he had let a small-time thief like Julian stay in room 302. He had traded his entire legacy for a single week of resort fees, and the cost was his total destruction. I wasn't finished cleaning up the mess Julian left behind in my name. I released a mountain of digital proof to the global credit bureaus showing exactly how Julian had forged my signature. I provided videos, emails, and confessions from his old associates. My credit score, which he had dragged into the gutter, jumped 400 points overnight. The bank that had sent those thugs to my house realized they had made a terrible mistake by threatening a Volkov. They sent me a handwritten public apology and a black card with no limit as a peace offering. I used that card to buy a new car for the woman whose house Julian had used as a shipping office during his scams. If you want to see how a queen fixes her reputation, subscribe for the final chapters. Justice was finally starting to feel like a warm breeze. Julian finally reached his breaking point. The heat, the rocks, and the crushing debt were too much for his weak soul. He tried to start a riot in the prison, hoping the chaos would allow him to slip out the back gate and disappear into the jungle. He was caught within minutes by guards who seemed to be waiting for him to move. They put him in solitary confinement, a dark stone box with no windows and no sound. He sat there in the silence, waiting for someone to tell him his sentence. He didn't know that I had secretly bought the entire private prison contract the night before. I wasn't just his creditor anymore, I was officially his warden. He was living in my house now, and I was the one who decided when the lights went on and when he got to eat. I flew back to the island to visit him. I walked down the long, cold hallway of the solitary wing, my heels clicking like a ticking clock. The guards opened the heavy steel door, and I stepped into the dark cell. There were no cameras and no witnesses. Julian was huddled in the corner, looking like a skeleton covered in gray skin. He didn't even look up at first. I stood over him and told him the absolute truth about why I had chosen him all those years ago. I didn't marry you because I was weak, Julian, I said, my voice echoing in the small room. I wanted to see if a normal man could be loyal when given everything. I wanted to see if I could live a life without shadows. I paused, watching him tremble. You failed the test, Julian. You proved that the shadows were always safer than people like you. While Julian was rotting in silence, his wealthy parents in Connecticut tried to hire a team of expensive lawyers to intervene. They thought their country club status and old money could intimidate a suburban widow. I didn't hide from them. I met them in their fancy lawyer's office and laid out a leather folder filled with evidence of Julian's other life. I showed them proof of the 3 other families he had been scamming and supporting across Europe while he was married to me. He had 3 other wives who were all currently facing financial ruin because of his lies. I watched the color drain from his mother's face as she realized her perfect son was a serial predator. I told them that if they spent 1 more cent trying to free him, I would ensure those 3 women took every piece of their inheritance. I didn't leave those women to suffer alone. I brought the 3 other wives together in a secret meeting in Paris. We were all different ages and from different backgrounds, but we all shared the same scar left by Julian's greed. We formed a coalition and pooled our information together. With my father's hackers leading the way, we hunted down every single offshore account and hidden asset Julian had tucked away in corners of the world he thought we couldn't find. We stripped him of his hidden properties, his secret cars, and even the small gold bars he had buried in a Swiss vault. We divided it all equally among his victims. By the time we were finished, Julian was officially the poorest man on the face of the earth. He didn't even own the shirt on his back anymore. It belonged to us. Chloe thought she was clever enough to play both sides. Even while working as my assistant, she tried to steal a set of diamond earrings from my dressing room, thinking she could sell them to buy a plane ticket out of the country. I had expected her to slip up. I had been waiting for it. I let her think she had succeeded for 3 whole days. I watched her hide the jewels in the lining of her coat with a smug look on her face. But the moment she reached the airport, she was surrounded by police. The jewels weren't just diamonds, they were fitted with microscopic GPS trackers that I had installed. If you want to see how a traitor finally meets her match, subscribe for the final 5 chapters. Chloe was led away in tears, realizing that she would be joining Julian in the world of the forgotten. To make sure Julian could never rise again, I filed a final civil lawsuit against him for emotional racketeering and massive fraud. My father's best lawyers argued the case in a court where the judge knew exactly who the Volkovs were. The court awarded me a total judgment of $100 million. It was a symbolic victory, but a powerful one. It meant that every legal document in the world now listed Julian as a high-level criminal debtor. Even if he somehow managed to leave prison one day, he would never be able to own a pair of socks or a loaf of bread without my legal permission. I had built a financial cage around him that was stronger than any iron bars. He was a permanent ghost in the system, and I held the only key to his existence. After the final court hearing, I flew back to my father's estate. We sat on the deck of his white yacht, the wind blowing soft across the Mediterranean Sea. He poured me a glass of wine and looked at me with a strange kind of respect in his eyes. He didn't see a daughter who needed protection anymore. "You're more like me than you ever wanted to be, Patricia," he said quietly. I looked at my hands, the same hands that used to bake cookies and plant roses. They felt different now. They felt steady and heavy with the weight of my ancestors. I realized in that moment that I didn't hate the feeling of being a Volkov anymore. I didn't disagree with him. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I realized I actually liked the power. I liked knowing that I could protect the things I loved by becoming the storm point 10 years passed like a slow, quiet river. I spent those years building my own legitimate empire, using the lessons I learned from both my father and my betrayal. One morning, Silas called to tell me that Julian was being released from the island prison. He was being kicked out because he was no longer a threat to anyone. When he walked out of the heavy iron gate, he didn't look like the man I married. He was old, broken, and his hair had turned a dusty white. He had absolutely nothing but the thin clothes on his back. He stood on the sidewalk, blinking at the bright sun, expecting to finally be a free man. But Silas was already waiting for him at the curb with a thick stack of papers. It was a bill for his 10-year prison stay and the interest on his debt. I moved on with my life in a way Julian could never imagine. I got married again 3 years ago. This time, I didn't choose a safe man who lied about his past. I married a man who knows exactly who my father is because his own family is just as powerful. He is twice as dangerous as Julian ever was, but he is honest about his darkness. We were driving through the city in the back of a black limousine when I saw a homeless man sitting on a park bench. He was shivering and clutching a thin blanket to his chest. As we drove past, I realized it was Julian. He looked up for a split second as the car rolled by, but he didn't even recognize me. I was a goddess in silk, and he was just a shadow. I didn't feel a single spark of pity. Julian found a crumpled dollar bill on the street later that afternoon. His stomach was growling, and his throat was parched. He walked into a small coffee shop, clutching the dollar like it was a golden treasure. He reached the counter and tried to buy a simple black coffee to warm his bones. The young cashier took the dollar and scanned it through the machine, but a bright red light started flashing on the screen immediately. The cashier looked at Julian with a cold, suspicious expression. "I can't take this money, sir. This dollar serial number is flagged in our system," the boy said firmly. "It officially belongs to the estate of Patricia Volkov." He was banned from the shop and pushed back out into the cold. He couldn't even spend a single dollar without my name appearing to stop him. I am sitting at my father's massive estate now, looking out over the private docks where our ships come and go. My father walked over to me this morning and placed his heavy gold signet ring in the palm of my hand. I am now the official head of the Volkov family. I look at the ring and think about the journey that brought me here. Julian thought he was fleeing a simple debt from a simple woman. He had no idea he was actually fleeing a dynasty that has lasted for centuries. He tried to break a link in a chain that was made of iron and blood. I close my fist around the ring and smile at the horizon. Julian is out there somewhere, cold and hungry, but I am finally home. The Volkovs always collect, and I have collected everything. Thank you. Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also turn on your notification bell so you be the first to get our next shocking revenge story.